Look at this court ruling from the Federal Court of Canada. And perhaps it's more than a coincidence. It's written by Justice Russell Zinn, the same federal court judge who ruled in our favor last October in the Debates Commission case. Here's the ruling. I want to go through it a bit. Now look who's suing whom. The Honorable Justice Patrick Smith and the Attorney General of Canada and the Canadian Judicial Council, the Canadian Superior Court Judges Association, and the Ontario Superior Court Judges Association interveners. It's just so many lawyers and judges. A judge is suing the Judicial Council and the Judges Associations and the government. So a judge is suing other judges, and then Judge Zinn is ruling on the judge versus judge battle. Holy moly. I'm going to read some of this for you. Justice Zinn starts by quoting the late journalist Christy Blatchford, who wrote a column about this whole case. The fact that Judge Patrick Smith is in danger of a removal is a sobering illustration of the no good deed goes unpunished saying. Christy Blatchford. Well, that gives you a hint which way this is going to go. Let me read. The Honorable Justice Patrick Smith, Justice Smith, is a judge of the Superior Court of Justice of Toronto. He challenges two decisions of the Canadian Judicial Council. The first is the August 28th decision of the Quebec Superior Court Associate Chief Justice Robert Pidgeon in his capacity as Vice Chairperson of the Judicial Conduct Committee to constitute a Judicial Conduct Review Panel. Second, Justice Smith challenges the November 5th 2008 decision of the review panel. Okay, now please don't click away. I promise it doesn't get more boring than that. That's the boringest part. Those are just the names of the fancy oversight committees that scrutinize judges. So Judge Smith is suing, or actually he's appealing to be more precise, rulings against him by Judge Pidgeon and a bunch of other judges who had condemned him. So it's a judge civil war. And our favorite judge, Judge Zinn, is the referee. Now, here's the part that's in plain English, but I predict you will find it as hard to understand as any lawyer would. Ready? The review panel concluded that Justice Smith, in accepting the appointment of interim dean academic at Boer-Alaskan Faculty of Law at Lakehead University, contravened Section 55 of the Judges Act. It further found that Judge Smith failed in his ethical obligations as a judge to avoid involvement in public debate that may unnecessarily expose him to political attack or be inconsistent with the dignity of judicial office. So hang on. This judge, the judge that's suing the other judges, Judge Smith, so he took a temporary position, that's what interim means, as the academic dean of a law school at Lakehead University. And the other judges said that's unethical. I'm not even kidding. That's what they said about him. Yeah, I'd sue them too. The decision of the review panel is not reasonable, and the Canadian Judicial Council procedure was applied unfairly to Justice Smith and was an abusive process. Justice Smith is entitled to a meaningful remedy. So Judge Zinn, that's our favorite guy, he sided with Judge Smith against this big shot panel of judges who had condemned him for helping a law school. Here are the facts as outlined by Justice Zinn. On April 16, 2018, the interim president and vice chancellor, Lakehead University, wrote to Justice Smith asking him to accept an appointment to the position of interim dean of the law school. The law school had existed only since 2013. Its mandate is Aboriginal and Indigenous law, natural resources and environmental law, and small firm and sole practice. The second permanent dean of the law school, Angelique Eaglewoman, resigned earlier in 2018, alleging institutional racism. In her letter to Justice Smith, the interim president notes the importance that it maintain the confidence and support of the Law Society of Ontario, the Federation of Law Societies of Canada, and of our local bar and extended communities. The interim president explains why he's being asked to take on this interim position. We make this urgent request based on your knowledge, skills, and experience as a judge of the Superior Court of Ontario. In addition, your long-standing connections and the respect you garner in the local, provincial, and national legal communities, combined with your significant work with Indigenous communities and your important publications focused on Aboriginal law in Canada, are critical to the ongoing evolution and success of the Faculty of Law. So just to be clear, this is an Aboriginal-focused law school. They're having some trouble. The whole place is wobbly and rickety. It's only 5 years old at this point. The university's president is desperate for someone to save the day, just to hold the fort while they find someone permanent. It's a bit unconventional, but a sitting judge might actually be just the right person. They literally ask him to do them a favor to save the school. Not just any school, but a school that has the purpose of helping Aboriginal people in the law. That sounds pretty noble to me, pretty woke, something that you'd think would receive support from everyone. And as Justice Zinn points out, Justice Smith sits in the Northwest region, and before becoming a judge in 2001, practiced law in Thunder Bay for 25 years. He has significant expertise in Aboriginal and Indigenous law. So he knows the file. He knows Aboriginal law, certainly more than most lawyers in downtown Toronto or Montreal would, just for example. In fact, I got to say, the more I learned about Judge Smith, he sounds like a perfect law school dean if the purpose of the school is to focus on Aboriginal law. Let me read. In October 2009, he was appointed to the Specific Claims Tribunal. Justice Smith worked with former judge and current Senator Murray Sinclair, chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, on various judicial education initiatives, including developing and co-chairing a 3-day intensive course sponsored by the National Judicial Institute on Aboriginal Law for judges from across Canada, and creating and updated a judicial bench book on Aboriginal law. He's often invited by legal organizations to speak on Aboriginal and Indigenous law, and is called upon regularly by judges across Canada to assist with the mediation of land claims and other litigation between First Nations and various levels of government. Okay, I've got to ask you a question. Does he sound racist? Does he sound stupid or ill-informed? Does Judge Smith sound unethical to you? I mean, I'm sorry, those questions are too absurd to even ask, aren't they? Well, to you maybe, but in a moment I'll tell you who is actually malicious enough to ask them. I'll tell you who complained about this in a way. In the meantime, try to guess, what is the most malicious negative low force in Canada today? Think lower. Okay, lower, I'll tell you in a moment. Okay, just to let you know, Judge Smith didn't just walk away from his job as a judge. That would be a bit nuts. He literally asked all his bosses for permission and for their advice. So he wrote to the chief judge of the province. That's the judge who's in charge of the other judges. He wrote, and they checked with the justice minister of the day, Jody Wilson-Raybould, who, as you know, is herself an Aboriginal woman. So everything was like, just do everything by the book, check all the boxes, which you would sort of expect and hope for from a judge, right? So here's how that went, according to Justice Zinn. Justice Smith informed the Honorable Heather J. Forster Smith, Chief Justice of the Superior Court of Justice, of the request from the law school. In his letter, Justice Smith says, the affairs at the school are in crisis. This characterization of the situation at the law school is not questioned. He asked for the approval of his Chief Justice and the Minister of Justice to accept this short-term appointment. The Chief Justice wrote to the Minister of Justice, Jody Wilson-Raybould, expressing her support for Justice Smith to accept this role. She notes that this request, quote, would take him outside of his judicial duties in a role that is unprecedented for a judge of our court. She also notes that Justice Smith is a supernumerary judge, so the impact may be less than it would in other circumstances, particularly until the fall. Now, by the way, as a supernumerary judge, Justice Smith performs judicial duties for only 6 months each year. She indicates that this is an exceptional situation and an opportunity for our court to respond positively to a number of Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations. The Chief Justice proposes to grant Justice Smith a leave of up to 6 months from June 1, 2018 to November 2018 under the authority given to her in paragraph 54(1)A of the Judges Act. She notes that anything beyond that would require an order in council. Okay, so that's a long quote. So both the Chief Judge and the Justice Minister say, all right, for a 6-month term, it's fine. He's only a half-time judge anyways. And Jody Wilson-Raybould thinks it would not only be a good thing in terms of helping the school, but it would show harmony, reconciliation, Let me quote some more. The Chief Justice writes that Justice Smith appreciates that he can only accept the role within certain clear parameters, including that his role be confined to academic leadership. He would delegate administrative authority over recruitment, financial decisions, and academic appeals to others within the school. Lastly, she observes, given the restrictions of Section 55 of the Judges Act, which prohibits extrajudicial employment, occupation, or business, he could not accept any remuneration from the university. So he's not going to take a dime for this, just to be very plain. He's not taking any money for this. So everyone's being very, very careful. If he's a dean, he's not going to hire and fire anyone. He's not going to spend or raise any money. Those could possibly be seen as showing some bias or something. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how that would show bias, but they didn't want to take any chances. He's just going as an academic guide. So the Justice Minister specifically writes back to the Chief Judge, I have no concerns about your granting Justice Smith a special leave from June 2018 to November 18, as outlined in your letter. Okay, so get this. He takes the gig, and the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, Trudeau's CBC state broadcaster, writes a story about the judge and includes rancor from some nobody critics. Of course, it's the CBC. They bitch and moan for a living. They're victimologists. They only have one narrative for Aboriginal people: victims. And an out-of-control legal busybody reads that CBC story about some people bitching, and he starts an investigation into Judge Smith's ethics. The week he accepted the job, he hadn't even started yet. Let me read. On May 9th, 2018, the executive director of the CJC, that's the Canadian Judicial Council, Norman Sabarin, wrote to Justice Smith with a copy to his Chief Justice. He observed that pursuant to Section 4.2 of the Canadian Judicial Council procedures for the review of complaints or allegations about federally appointed judges, in addition to receiving and reviewing complaints, he may review any other matter involving the conduct of a Superior Court judge that comes to the attention of the Executive Director and appears to warrant consideration. He further noted that under Section 4.3 of the review procedures, if he determines that the matter warrants consideration, he must refer it to the Judicial Conduct Committee. With that background, Mr. Saburin writes in his letter to Justice Smith that media reports indicate that he has accepted to serve as Dean of Lakehead University on an interim basis, and he attaches a CBC web report posted May 3rd, 2018, entitled Justice Patrick Smith named Interim Dean of Lakehead Law School. It reports on the departure of former Dean Angelique Eaglewoman, who on stepping down said systemic issues within the university and challenges to implementing the Board Law School Faculty of Law's Aboriginal and Indigenous law mandate have made my continued involvement in the law school untenable. The news report concludes with the reaction of some Indigenous leaders to the situation at the law school. Since then, Indigenous leaders representing dozens of First Nations communities across northwestern Ontario called for immediate change at Lakehead University. They made several recommendations, including that Lakehead commit to appointing an Indigenous person as Eaglewoman's successor, that an independent review examine all issues and allegations raised by her, and that appropriate measures are subsequently taken. Mr. Sabarin says, in light of Sections 54 and 55 of the Judges Act, and given the general duties and ethical obligation of judges, acceptance of the interim dean role brings me to the view that the situation may warrant consideration by counsel. Prior to reaching any decision, Mr. Sabarin invites Justice Smith's views. This is Norman Sabarin, a sour-looking man. He looks like a nosy bureaucrat, doesn't he? He's the executive director of the Canadian Judicial Council. So let me be clear. There actually hadn't been any complaint. He hadn't actually started yet. Both the chief judge of the province and the justice minister, who's Aboriginal, like the idea. Judge Smith was saving the day. It was a 6-month mission of mercy for a school that was falling apart. There were lots of checks and balances on what he could or could not do. Not only did no one complain, but every I had been dotted and every T had been crossed. But this meddling little bureaucrat took it upon himself to launch an investigation. No complaints. I'm serious. Now, you can imagine in a case of judges fighting with judges about being judges and the whole thing being reviewed by judges, this ruling goes on for quite a while. I can just tell you one thing I've learned from this is that it's not unprecedented for sitting judges to also be law school deans. In fact, in the past, judges, even on our Supreme Court of Canada, have served as law school deans. Judge Smith put in lots of safeguards. He said, for example, when he was done as interim dean, he went back to a judge, he wouldn't sit on any cases that involved that university. So he's being extremely well behaved. He would recuse himself from those cases. It was all so reasonable. He went back and forth with the Canadian Judicial Council's Norman Sabarin. So he'd say, oh, no, everything's fine. I checked, I got permission. But that sneering, sourpuss bureaucrat proceeded to investigate and prosecute him nonetheless. I swear to God, he was doing this for free, let me remind you. Judge Smith wasn't taking a dime. Now here's where it gets weird, and here's where it gets gross. So remember, this was just a 6-month interim thing. Helping an Aboriginal law school that was falling apart. Helping Aboriginal people, students, the community. But this Norman Sabarin and the Judicial Council, they just won't let this go. Does Judge Smith need any of this? Does he need the hassle, the stress, the weird attempt to shame him? Shame him? No, he does not. Does he need the investigation and the prosecution of him? Seriously, that's what they do. They were prosecuting him for an ethical breach. Does he need this in his life? No, he does not. So he resigned. That's what they wanted him to do. So he resigned. Not sure how that helps the law school or the reputation of the law itself or Aboriginal students. Not sure, but that weirdo, Norman Sabarin, who acted in the absence of a complaint. Let me say that again. No one complained to the Judicial Council. Just some whiny, grievance-mongering report in the CBC state broadcaster. And that was enough. Sabarin got his way. Judge Smith quit. But Sabarin and the Canadian Judicial Council, they weren't done yet. They wanted their pound of flesh. They proceeded against Judge Smith anyways. Even after he bent the knee, even after he quit and said, all right, I'm out of here, they still went after him. I'm serious. And incredibly, they leaked their denunciation of him, their ruling against him to the media before they even told him. Let me read. On November 6, 2018, the CJC, that's the Canadian Judicial Council, told 2 reporters that the review panel had reached its decision and that it would be released that day without having so informed Justice Smith or his counsel. The CJC published a press release on its website the same day with a link to the panel decision. Is that normal? Or is that crooked? Why are you leaking things to the media? You're supposed to be the court. What the hell is wrong with the Canadian Judicial Council? Why do they hate Judge Smith so much? Why are they prosecuting a man without even a complaint against him? Why are they continuing their prosecution even after he complied with their bizarre demands? And then why are they leaking the results like some cheap political intrigue rather than being the alleged counsel of the most senior judges in the land? You want to know who brought the administration of justice into disrepute here? Who makes judges look unethical and unreliable and politically motivated and untrustworthy and punitive and biased? Yeah, it ain't Judge Smith, I'll tell you that. So I'm pleased to say that Judge Smith sued the bastards. Technically speaking, he appealed the ruling of this council of judges. Let me read. These applications focus on 3 issues: whether the decision of the review panel decision is reasonable, whether the CJC proceedings were procedurally unfair or an abusive process, and if the applications succeed, what is the appropriate remedy? Oh, it is a pleasure to read the dozens of pages that follow, but it wouldn't fit in this video monologue. Suffice it to say, Justice Zinn more or less accuses the Canadian Judicial Council of, quote, reverse engineering the verdict, as in they came up with their decision first and then they tried to find some way to justify it. He says they misinterpreted the law. They didn't use common sense and they were just wrong about their ethical accusations. But most damning to me is Justice Zinn's ruling that this Canadian Judicial Council engaged in an abuse of process, as in they had all this power in their hands and they abused it. They were corrupted. Here, read this. I find that the CJC disciplinary procedure was misused from the beginning when the executive director determined that Justice Smith accepting the appointment to the law school was a matter that warrants consideration. Of course, it didn't warrant consideration. Judge Smith got permission from the chief judge and the justice minister. Then he took the interim job, no payment, all sorts of checks and balances on him. If taking that job was unethical, then by definition, so was the chief judge of the whole province and the justice minister, because they approved it, really. Remember, not a single complaint to the judicial committee. And when they persecuted, I'm not even going to say prosecuted, when they persecuted Judge Smith, they claimed it was because The law doesn't allow him to take outside work, and then it puts him in an ethical bind. They threw those baseless accusations at him, which were absurd. Like I say, Judge Zinn, in his ruling here, accused the Canadian Judicial Council of just making up excuses to backfill their hate for this guy. So why did they hate him? What was really motivating their persecution of him? Why were they shaming him like this? Remember, Justice Zinn didn't say they just got it wrong. They misused it. It was an abusive process. Why? This Judge Smith, I never met him. It seems like a nice enough guy. Seems like he loves Aboriginal people, lives in the North, loves the law, seems to be politically sympathetic to vulnerable people. I dare say he sounds like a stand-up guy, someone who's sort of a credit to the court. I think he's one of the good guys. I don't know him. I don't know him. So why did they prosecute him, drive him out, sue him, condemn him, and then leak against him? That's the lamest part. What's going on here? Well, Justice Zinn has a theory. It's that article from Trudeau's CBC state broadcaster. Take a look. Just for clarification here, a reminder, Pigeon ACG is Associate Chief Justice Pigeon, the judge on the Judicial Council who condemned Judge Smith. Let me quote. As noted above, the only information Justice Smith had as to the substance of the matter was the initial letter of the executive director, attaching one web page reporting that he had accepted the appointment, and its reference to sections 54 and 55 of the Judges Act and the general duties and obligations of judges. However, Pigeon, in his reasons for referring the matter to the review panel, indicates that other material was before the executive director which guided his actions and decisions. He writes, following Justice Smith's appointment as interim dean, First Nations leaders were upset and criticized the lack of prior consultation and failure to follow the recommendations of the National Advisory Committee on Aboriginal Issues. They called on the university to rescind the appointment. On the 9th of May 2018, given the public comments made in response to the statements made by First Nations chiefs, the executive director of the Canadian Judicial Council wrote to Justice Patrick Smith and his Chief Justice to obtain more information. None of this information was provided to Justice Smith. Specifically, he was not informed of the executive director's concerns about the call for him to resign, nor was he provided with any of the public comments made in response to statements made by First Nations chiefs, nor those statements. Procedural fairness dictates that one is entitled to know the case to be met. This is a fundamental procedural right that the executive director failed to give to Justice Smith. So let me explain if it's not clear. Some malcontents bitch about the fact that they weren't consulted about Judge Smith for his temporary interim leadership. And so the CBC loves that because remember, the only narrative they accept about Aboriginal people is about grievance and victimology. So here's some good guy coming to do them a favor for free. Just a 6-month patch while they get their act together. Seems like a lovely man. But someone bitched to the CBC and the CBC makes an industry out of bitching and this scares or motivates Norman Sabarin and the rest of the cowards at the Canadian Judicial Council, but they don't have the courage to actually tell Judge Smith why they're mad at him, why they hate him. They probably don't even hate him. They're just so afraid of some CBC whipped up mob. They're so afraid of political correctness that actually never materializes here, that they set up Judge Smith. You get that? They set him up. They claim he was being disciplined for ethical corruption, for illegally taking a side job, none of which is true. It's patently absurd. But because they lack the moral courage or the plain old honesty to say what really motivated them, some CBC quoting some unknown anonymous people bitching that no one asked them who should be the interim dean to run the law school that's falling apart. And so based on that, the unethical Canadian Judicial Council set out to destroy a good man, a better man than any of them, a man who had done more for Aboriginal people than any of them, I'll tell you that. Let me quote Justice Zinn. I find that the CJC process involving Justice Smith was unfair to the point that it is contrary to the interests of justice. It was an abuse of process. Boom. You judges are unfair. It's in your bones. And the thing is about judges, all they have is their fairness. If a judge isn't fair, it's like salt that's lost its saltiness. There's nothing left, is there? Except a bunch of overpaid political hacks. Now look at this. Look at all the lawyers involved in this massive fight. The judge has a lawyer. The judges he's suing each have lawyers. There are lawyers for lawyers, and then there's a judge judging the judges who judged the judge. What, did this whole thing cost $1 million? Probably. Was it all unfair to Judge Smith? Absolutely. Because the cowards at the Canadian Judicial Council were worried about some CBC political pout? Yes. And my point to you is this, my friends. If these politically correct, abusive, secretive, biased, corrupt, unreasonable liars can do this to one of their own, what do you think they would do to you? That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.